Thank you all for coming tonight to this very special opening event for this year's Department of English, Rhetoric, and Writing reading series. My name is Sandra Meek, and I coordinate the department reading series and teach creative writing here at Berry. Tonight, as director of the Georgia Poetry Circuit, I'm very happy to welcome you to the inaugural reading for the Georgia Poets Initiative, a project of the GPC. The Georgia Poets Initiative is a registry of Georgia's best poets who have each agreed to give a reading at a Georgia college or university during each academic year for no stipend. More than 30 poets from a dozen Georgia institutions of higher learning, as well as independent writers, have signed on to volunteer for the program, including the former Poet Laureate of the United States, Natasha Trethewey, Judson Mitchum, Poet Laureate of Georgia, Jericho Brown, Emory Professor, and this year's winner of an Anisfield Wolf Award, who will be reading in this chapel next year, and tonight's reader, Thomas Lux. The generosity of these poets, their sense of communal responsibility, is phenomenal, and it is fitting that this program be born here at Berry with its deep and enduring history of service. It is a true honor tonight to welcome to Berry renowned poet, teacher, and literary citizen, Thomas Lux, one of our nation's most original and important contemporary poets. Tom Lux was born in Massachusetts, grew up on a dairy farm, and graduated from Emerson College. He has published more than 15 books of poetry, and his many awards and grants include the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and 3 fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts. He has taught at many colleges and universities, including Oberlin, Warren Wilson, and Sarah Lawrence, and is currently the Bourne Chair in Poetry and director of the McKever Visiting Writers Program at the Georgia Institute of Technology, where he also serves as director of poetry at Tech. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Lux said, "I like to make the reader laugh and then steal that laugh right out of the throat, because I think life is like that, tragedy right alongside humor." Always engaging, his poems are accessible but deeply resonant, reflecting his belief that, as he said, there's plenty of room for strangeness, mystery, originality, wildness, etc., in poems that also invite the reader into the human and alive center about which the poem circles. His poems often begin from this strangeness, as a few titles will show. Tarantulas on the Life Buoy, The Night So Bright a Squirrel Reads, Boy Born with Small Knife in His Head, The Goldfish Room, where the cops beat you in the head with a phone book. But sometimes, in a Lux poem, an ordinary day just gets strange fast. Listen tonight, especially for the turn of events in his poem, A Man Gets Off Work Early, the most understatedly spooky poem I know. But in Lux's making, that very strangeness unexpectedly brings us back into a felt understanding of what it really is to be human, which is not always the same as humane. In Mole Emerging from the Trench Wall, Verdun 1916, for example, the poem follows the animal's progress in that war zone. Doing his job, the mole, disturbed no doubt by the shaking and noisy dirt, but still digging blind, goes on with the only life he knows. By the time the speaker imagines a soldier pulling the whole 6 inches of him free, the reader's empathy is with the mole. When the soldier turns him around, puts him back, nose first, in his tunnel, the tension lessens. It seems compassion can thrive even here. But the poem continues. As the soldier lights a match, which he then turns to the mole's stubby, muscular tail. What first seemed to promise a kind of right action turns suddenly to random, meaningless cruelty. How that resonates with the poem's war setting, Lux doesn't have to say. We feel it, and we feel we have traveled to that place of felt understanding with the speaker, with the poet. In this way, Lux's poems, through their fusion of clarity and mystery, of humor and tragedy, enact that most human and humane connection with the reader, there, now, at the alive center about which the poem circles. Please welcome Tom Lux.
Wow, thank you, Sandy. That was a very thoughtful and generous introduction. I never thought putting that match to that, it was kind of cruel. I mean, to put a match to a mole's tail, it was also telling him, get out of here. Turn around, go back to where you came from, because you just ended up in a trench where you could get killed. But it must have hurt him, too. I am going to start with the poem that Sandy mentioned. Can you hear me if I talk about like this? Can you hear me in the back? Like I said, I didn't want to be so far away up there. And I also, if I have amplification, I tend to move a little bit and when I read, and I go in and out of the amplification. But if my voice starts to drop, somebody just in the back, just go like this, and I'll try to pick it up again. But this poem, A Man Gets Off Work Early, that's the title of the poem. It runs into the body of the poem. A man gets off work early and decides to snorkel in a cool mountain lake. Not as much to see as in the ocean, but it's tranquil. No sharks floating face down into that other world. The pine's serrated shadows reach across the waters, and just now, just below him, to his left, a pickerel, long and sharp and whuppa, 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 whuppa. Loud, louder, behind him, above him, the water, louder, whuppa, whuppa, whuppa. 2 weeks later, 20 miles away, he's found a cinder, his wetsuit melted on him in a crab-like position on the still, warm ash of the forest floor through which fire tore unchecked. Despite the chemicals, the men with axes and shovels, despite the huge scoops of lake water dropped on it from his friend, the sky, on whom he turned his back. Now, do you get the literal of that? What happened to that guy? You know, you ever see that firefighting in usually the Northwest, where helicopters come down with huge scoops to pick up water, and then they carry them and dump them on a fire? That guy was just floating around in not scuba diving, snorkeling, and he got caught up in one of those things and dumped on a fire. Tough way to buy it. Tough way. Somebody told me that story years ago, and I just assumed it was true. Maybe it was true, but then somebody later told me it was something on the internet, and maybe it wasn't true. But when I wrote the poem, I didn't have a computer, so I had no way of checking that. Maybe somebody could look that up to see if that ever really happened. If it did, it would go in the list of top 10 really dumb ways to die. I'm going to read now from a new book that'll be out in the spring. It has a section of poems in it called odes. Odes are poems of celebration, praise, gratitude, things like that. And most of the poems that I'm going to read fall under that category. 1 or 2, 3 of them maybe arguably are kind of anti-odes. They're a little bit more quarrelsome than some of the others. The first one is called Ode to the Joyful Ones, and that title comes from an Anglican prayer that goes, shield your joyful ones. We should shield our joyful, the joyful ones among us. They are precious in some way. Ode to the joyful ones. That they walk, even stumble among us is reason to praise them or protect them. Even the sound of a lead slug dropped on a lead plate, even that for them is music. Because they bring laughter's brief amnesia. Because they stand talking, taking pleasure in others with their hands on the shoulders of strangers, on the shoulders of each other. Because you don't have to tell them to walk toward the light. Because if there are 2 pork chops, they will serve you the better one. Because they will give you the crutch off their backs. Because when there are 2 of them together, their shining fills the room. Because you don't have to tell them to walk towards the light. This one is called, and sometimes the title will run into the body of the poem, so I'll say it twice. But this one is called Ode to the Eating Establishment where the utensils were chained to the table. Ode to the eating establishment where the utensils were chained to the table, much like the pens at the post office or a bank. I'd never had reason to enter a bank. I bought a stamp once. I stood in line with 2 dimes and some pennies, but not many. More than a stamp, I wanted a pencil, so I'd feel like I went to school. Those were difficult times. There were different rules. Often, I dined at the above establishment. One was permitted to bring one's own spoon. I didn't have a spoon, but hoped to soon. Nevertheless, I ate my belly full. I was a young man, and I walked out into the green cornet of morning. This is called Ode to the Fire Hydrant. Ode to the Fire Hydrant. Who has not wanted to tip his hat to the big lug nut top hat it wears? Unless you were impelled to paint them through a long summer to repay a societal debt, and had also a boss with a quota of hydrants and asses to kick. As an artist, I could not create under such conditions. There was never the right north light. The brushes were cheap and left bristles in my work, which I did not intend. On a few, as symbols of oppression, in the right by accident place, they edified and were, therefore, intentional. Because of these and other compromises, I refuse to sign my art, with one exception, the hydrant in front of my grammar school, which would have burned down without it in a fire I started. I trimmed a little tuft of grass, we were issued a pair of shears, and writ my initials with the corner of a brush, using the last few drops of red paint from a state paint can. During the summer, I was asked many times why I was covered with blood. You know, red paint. Ode while awaiting execution. Into the mute and blue-green marble mailbox, my dust deserves to go, though not for that which I'm going. I deserve to go and not alone because I did not sing loud enough about this life, this world. Singing poorly is acceptable. Not loud enough is not. There are too many things I saw of which I did not sing, things raw and eyeball-vibrating, ravishing, or worse, things I forgot until a pinprick shock, a creak in a house of wood waking to heat, or a bent nail remembered for me. How did Spinoza define happiness? Patient acceptance of the inevitable? I find myself impatient. I'm often impatient, not for the inevitable, which can wait patiently for me. So far, the governor's not called the warden, whose palm has an itch. He prefers an electrical switch. My lawyers, having in law no degrees, are not allowed in to counsel me. Appeals are exhausted, or at least very tired. So, I scratched this out on my last yellow legal pad's last page. I deserve to go, but not for that which I'll lie on the table and get the needle. Ode to the eraser as big as a bus. I dedicate this poem to a poet, a friend of mine named Bruce Weigel, who was a Vietnam veteran. He was a veteran of Vietnam, decorated, goes back to Vietnam now frequently with other veterans to meet with his former enemies and translate their poetry and things like that. Ode to the eraser as big as a bus. This is maybe one of the ones that would be a bit of an anti-ode. Thank you for the relief, the rest, for leaving only palimpsest and a little rolled orange eraser dust, and not the XXXX of a stitched up wound when you came to do what erasers do. The way you rubbed out in one wide swath the memory of that place 6,000 miles away. Most of us never heard of it until a monk set himself on fire and sat there serenely in the center of the flames until he fell over. Why did he do that? My friend said. We were in high school in a town like thousands of towns. We were glad to be American, and I mean that, true. My friend also said the only thing this town lacks is an ocean. We found one 101 miles away. Thank you for erasing the next years in that distant place, erasing 1 million people living there, erasing how many thousands I lost count along that black wall of people living here who went there. Some of my friends and yours, and those who returned. We know some who were strafed by the chemical that turns green to orange, now with electrodes in their brains or their bodies cluster-bound with tumors. That's referring to, of course, Agent Orange and the long-term damage that has done to many of our veterans of that war. Ode to the unbroken world which is coming. It must be coming, mustn't it? Churches and saloons are filled with decent humans. A mother wants to feed her daughter, fathers to buy their children things that break. People laugh all over the world. People laugh. We were born to laugh, and we know how to be sad. We dislike injustice and cancer and are not unaware of our terrible errors. A man wants to love his wife. His wife wants him to carry something. We're capable of empathy and intense moments of joy. Sure, some of us are venal, but not most. There's always a punch bowl somewhere in which floats a life's a bullet, that fast, and the sweeter for it. It's the same everywhere. Slovenia, India, Pakistan, Suriname. People like to pray or they don't, or they like to fill a blue plastic pool in the backyard with a hose and watch their children splash, or sit in cafes or a table with family. And if a long train of cattle cars passes along West Ridge, it's only the cattle from East Ridge going to the abattoir. The unbroken world is coming. It must be coming. I heard a choir. There were clouds, dust. I heard it in the streets. I heard it announced by loud-hailers mounted on trucks. Still hear me in the back okay? This is called Ode to the Electric Fish That Eat Only the Tails of Other Electric Fish. Also, the title runs into the body. Ode to the electric fish that eat only the tails of other electric fish which regenerate their tails, and also eat only the tails of other electric eels, presumably smaller, who in turn eat. Without consulting an ichthyologist, eels are fish, I defer to biology's genius. I know little of their numbers and habitat other than they are river dwellers. Guess which river? I have only a note taken in reading or fever. I can't tell from my handwriting which. All I know is it seems sensible, sustainable. No fish die. Nobody ever gets so hungry he bites off more than a tail. The sting, the trauma keep the bitten fish lean and alert. The need to hide while regrowing a tail teaches guile. They'll eat smaller tails for a while. These eels themselves are odes. Now, I'm pretty sure I did read that somewhere about these eels. When I say guess which river, what's the best guess of all the great rivers in the world where something like that would happen? Amazon, sure. So that's why I don't have to say it in the poem. Maybe somebody could look that up too, see if it's, if it's true. If I was writing science, it would have to be true. Or if I was writing journalism, it would have to be true. But this is a poem, so I can, you can make stuff up. But I think I did read that. Ode to peep tubes and their makers. Peep tubes it was an early name for telescopes. Peep tubes. You should still call them that. That's better than telescopes. Peep tubes. Microscopes, telescopes were called peep tubes. Let's say peep tubes are a pair of lenses ground and polished and attached at each end of a tube in a manner that brings forth the heretofore unseen from the so tiny as to not be to the nude eye, to the so massive but so far away no unaided eye can see it either. To discover the nearer, tiny world. What's that wormy blur writhing in a drop of water? In a dollop of sperm, are those tiny animalcules baby boys or baby girls? The better the peep tubes, the more they see. The invisible visible, the distant close. I like best the collapsible peep tube the captain snaps open to read a far ship's flag. Time to haul out the powder kegs or pull alongside for plum cakes and canary wine. To see things no other eye has seen, I have relied my whole life on peanuts. When I split open these curvy, similar to early fertility symbols, legumes, I am Anton von Leeuwenhoek. I am Galileo Galilei. I'm the captain on the deck of a thirsty ship, a hungry ship, and I see land. Through my peep tube, I see fresh waterfalls, mild humans, and I turn to my shipmates and say, however a sailor says it, heave to or ho, boys, this way, over there, I see land. Ode to Gandhi, who wrote a letter to Hitler asking him not to start a war. I like to think the stamp got it to Hitler's desk, perhaps a whiff of curry. Gandhi's handwriting. Hitler got thousands of letters every day during the heady years. They began to tail off after Stalingrad. 3 staff members culled them to a handful, which Bormann screened further. I doubt Gandhi wrote it in English, which he wrote and spoke well. Hitler didn't read or write Gujarati. Gandhi didn't speak or write German. This mystery, however, interests me not enough. I can, if I cared to, find that letter in the machine on which I typed this. But I know what he said. He asked him not to start a war. He was polite. He said something about the power of nonviolence. He wrote the letter. For that, I hope the bullet that later ripped into his bony chest did not hurt too much or for too long. Pretty quiet in here. Okay. That I know I did read. I love that idea that Gandhi writes a letter to Hitler saying, don't start a war. I love Gandhi's heart for doing that, and I'm astonished at his naivete in doing it. He probably knew it was fruitless, but his heart told him to do it anyway. Ode to pain in the absence of an obvious cause of pain. Will you show me the tiny white scar where the tip of a blade broke off and migrated to a spot below your left lung? I thought not. And neither will you run a magnet across my chest, nor an electro scan, nor wand. Pain gets to live where it wants and doesn't answer the door, even for the men with warrants. Pain's private and seeks its preferable place to rent or buy or occupy inside a body. It builds a little house whose shades every hour, every day are drawn. Pain maintains a tidy lawn. But when pain, like an extended metaphor, imposes itself upon a body, then it's time to take up a knife and ring the buzzer. Ode elaborating on the obvious. Whoa. That was close. I'm just not
That's the
gonna
other
touch
side.
this. I'm just not going to touch it anymore. I wonder if that was some kind of signal. Ode elaborating on the obvious. It's a miraculous apparatus, consciousness, even blinking off and on, even on a mattress as proto-coffin. I ate the pudding once from a plastic tray of lunch a kind nurse served my father. He didn't want to eat it, or anything. A friend wrote that he found Jesus. A friend wrote that his wife is dying. A friend who found Jesus, wrote again that he lost Jesus. He was just here, and now he's not. My friend whose wife is dying did not write to say his wife is not dying. Here's a nice sound if they're 2 blocks over at the schoolyard. Children. This is something I like to look at. Thick yellow brushstrokes. I love to whiff winter's cilantro snows. The taste of choke cherries, bitter, breaking on my tongue. I loved to touch my child's forehead for fever and the feeling of finding none. Ode to all songs, poems, stories that begin, I woke up this morning. As in, I woke up this morning and I could see. I heard a bird. The night's clouds of chloroform were dispersed by clean winds. It was my nose, which is also good for breathing, told me this. As in, I woke up this morning in biological truth. As in, discontinuity postponed. As in, I woke up this morning and can't be arrested for a facial crime, not smiling at mention of the leader's name. Nor do I have to take a dance class if I don't want to. As in, I woke up this morning with a red milkweed beetle on my pillow, and his red stripe was a shiver's pleasure. I woke up this morning and ate neither rice, gruel, nor jelly. I woke up this morning and thought of my mother, who woke up for 33,580 mornings and then didn't. As in, I woke up this morning with a cruise ship ticket in my pocket, and it was not crossing the green sea of darkness. As in, I woke up this morning. Thank you very much. I'd be glad to answer some questions if anybody has any. Yeah.
So, to my understanding, poems are interpreted differently by the medium. How do you change the way you present your poems than how they're written?
I'm trying to read them. I try to write them on the page to teach the reader how I'm reading them. All poets do this to try to, we use things like line breaks in particular. You emphasize certain words, timing, all the things that go into any kind of writing. But I'm trying to write the poem on the page so the reader can read it, hear it, pretty much the way I read it out loud. I'm trying to do that. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to tone. Tone is a very hard thing to carry from the written language to the page. Things like irony. Poets often say one thing but mean another. That's what metaphor is. So it's tricky. But the way I write the poem on the page, everything I do on that page is trying to teach the reader how it would be said out loud. Excuse me. And they are meant to be read out, spoken out loud. I think of my poems as human speech. You could probably tell I wasn't reciting them. I was reading them like human speech. That help?
Thank you.
Any other questions? I see you do that. The dude with long hair back there. Long haired hippies at this college? Yeah? We don't let them at Georgia. You're going to need a haircut yourself.
You can get one with me.
That's the whole point of me giving long-haired guys stuff like that, so they can come back like that. Thank you. I don't know what happened with this dude. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Shoot.
Okay, so how long would you say on average it takes you to come up with a concept of a poem and have the end result on paper?
The concept can come kind of quickly, but often it's just a tiny little thing and only a tiny little crack of a hint of what the poem is ultimately turns out to be. But I didn't read anything there that didn't take me at least 15 drafts to write, and 20, 25, 30 is not unusual, and that's always after over a period of at least weeks and sometimes months and even years. I don't mean working every single day on it or anything like that, but the whole point is to try to make it sound like some guy is just talking or ranting or whatever. But for me, anyway, to do that, to create that kind of illusion, I have to kind of sweat blood. I have to work on it. Poems are made things. I said this earlier in a little class. Everybody knows to play a violin, you can't just pick it up and play it. You have to take lessons, and you're terrible at first. Everybody knows that a dancer, any ballerinas here, anybody dance ballet here? Everybody knows for a ballerina to make one of those leaps and make it look simple like a gazelle. We know they had to practice that forever, and their feet had to bleed, and their toes had to bleed. But sometimes people think poetry, well, I have language and I have feelings, and I know what a poem looks like. It's kind of skinny on the page. That's even easier to do than prose. You got to fill up the whole page if you're writing prose. But that's a stereotype or an illusion about poetry that kind of comes down your arm, and the poet is just, it kind of writes itself. Maybe that happens with some poets. Historically, it's happened maybe 3 or 4 times in the history of literature where really good poems have gotten written quickly at a stroke. And maybe other poets can do that, but I can't. I have to work on it. It takes time and it takes a lot of, just takes time and work, that's all. But it's in the work, it's in working on the poem that you make discoveries, where you discover things that you didn't know you felt about the subject or whatever it was you were writing about. You didn't know things you have to make no discovery for the writer, no discovery for the reader, said Mr. Cross. If you don't discover something you didn't know you felt or thought about the subject while you're working on it, the reader's not going to make any discoveries about that subject or theme while they're reading it. So it's a process and work, practice, like anything else. Any other questions? Yeah.
What are your general inspirations behind your poetry, if you have any, or is it just kind of random?
The laughter and the tears. Just being alive, whatever, everything in between those things. A lot of my subjects I find or strike me from reading, that electric eel poem. Something strikes me if it's something I run across in reading, and it might just, not an idea, it could be a 2-word coupling that I might see in a sentence that strikes me as having some kind of metaphorical possibility, something there that I could try to discover or explore something. But generally, I avoid the word inspiration. That gets into that realm of, it comes down your arm and you write the poem. You need to feel something. I need to feel something intensely. But I don't like to call it inspiration. I like to just call it, I'm feeling something here that's telling me I got to try to explore this, and then I work. Then it's work. That's one thing I do know how, and I know that I know how to do. I know how to work. I don't know what the results are going to be, but I know how to work. Yeah.
So going off your question, what did you feel when you wrote Boy Born with Snow?
I think the metaphor there has to do with something about someone who is born somehow differently. This kid had, a knife is a symbol of aggression and violence and stuff like that, and that kid is inspired or is kind of driven by that. I don't remember totally, but I think it just started with the image. I don't think I read that. I think it just one of those images that popped up. Maybe, you know, every once in a while you see something like it. You ever hear about that guy who shot himself in the face with a nail gun and he didn't even know it, and he goes to the doctor and they see a nail in his head, you know? Maybe something like that started it, but it's a contradiction that I'm playing with there. The idea of a knife in a baby's head, or what would the parents think? Maybe that came out of something. Oh, okay. It's a little poem. A boy born with a small knife in his head. 1/2 inch long, mother of pearl handle, slim, sharp steel blade. X-rays, a tiny wife in this baby's brain, raised at an angle as if leading a charge up and out his fontanelle. The baby's fine. He's a fat baby and already sleeps all night on a belly full of his mother's milk. Will it hurt my baby? It's his twin, the doctor says. I can take him out. So it's playing on all sorts of things. Of maybe even, we've heard of people who are supposed to be twins, but some part of that, one of the twins never got developed. It's playing on stuff like that. But I can't, if I could paraphrase, if any one of us could paraphrase any poems that we read, we don't really need the poem. They're not about, I don't like to even use the word meaning. I like the word Robert Frost used, ulteriority. What's the ulterior kind of motives of this poem? What does this poem make you feel? Do you feel the anxiety in this poem? But if we can just paraphrase the poem out, and that's its meaning, that's kind of tedious. It takes some of the mystery away. I want poems that I read, I want them, first of all, to do something. I want them to move me in some way. And if I could find what part of being alive and human that poem is connected to, then it will move me even a little bit more. And that's usually enough for me. The main purpose of poetry is pleasure. It's a kind of pleasure. It's not quite the same as the Simpsons say, who I dig very much, but it's a kind of pleasure. Strangeness. I like maybe he's like he's charging like a general or charge with a sword. You all know what a fontanelle is? The part of the baby's skull that doesn't close up for the first several months. I had a problem when I was a baby that my parents still don't know how this happened or why, but somebody came into my baby room and my fontanelle was still, it wasn't closed up. And they had a melon waller, and they went into my brain and took out, we know how the brain, certain parts of the brain you can learn different things. They took out the part that allows me to learn foreign languages, and also algebra. So I couldn't do any of those things. I was trying to move towards writing and reading. So I don't know why they did that. Maybe they gave it to somebody else who really speaks good French now. I don't know. Probably some kid at Georgia Tech. Any other questions?
Ooh. That makes me think. That might could give you inspiration for another poem. Because there's people who've been knocked out or unconscious, and when they wake up, they can speak another language.
I've heard things like that. A guy had a rail spike go through his head and it changes it. That's how one of the ways that brain science was advanced, by those kinds of brain injuries, knowing how certain parts of the brain can control certain things. I was kidding about that. No. Any questions? Yeah.
So you've been talking about how you sweat blood, and one thing you know how to do is work. What does that look like for you?
Does it look like? It looks like you're not working at all, because you're just sitting at a desk and looking down at a page, and I write often by hand early on before before I put it on the typer on the computer. Somebody once said that often writers are working the hardest when it doesn't look like they're working at all. I don't run around, pace up and down or anything like that, or I don't drink constant coffee or smoke or anything like that. I sit. I make a point of not having a view. I don't want to be tempted to look out the window and stuff like that, but I just work. I just sit down, take a pen. Left-handed, I take the pencil or the pen. It's trial and error. There's nothing glamorous about it at all. It's work. No different. I don't look any different than when I'm writing a poem than you look when you're doing your homework or writing a composition or something like that. Same thing. I don't think. Does my head light up or anything like that? I don't think so.
You write longhand?
Pardon me?
You write longhand?
I do early drafts now. I've been doing it a little bit less, and sometimes I even start poems on the computer now. But I still do I like the silence of it.
Did you ever typewriter?
I use a computer now, but that's about. I'm pretty computer illiterate. I can write on it. I can do email. I learned how to forward emails a couple of years ago. I just learned how to text last year because it's the only way I could get my daughter to respond to me. How many of you knuckleheads don't listen to when your parents call you on your cell phone, you don't listen to their messages, right? How many of you don't listen? Yeah. Most of you don't listen. You call your parents back, and then they have to repeat everything. Finally, I just gave up and did that. But let me ask you this: how many of your parents are still paying for your cell phone bills? So if they're listen to their messages, but parents have caught up. Right? Your parents know now that you don't listen, right? And they will, they know you'll call them back. You'll see their message, so they don't waste their breath so much anymore with a wrong message. Another one? Where? Yeah. Setting, right? Well, I have a study in my house that's filled with my books, and I just have I don't know what you call it. It's a kind of like a formica thing that I put on two file cabinets, and that's my desk, and it's against the wall, and I just sit there. But to me, I love writing in a room filled with books. I also love sleeping in a room filled with books. Borges said he couldn't sleep in a room unless it was filled with books. And I have a lot of books, so this makes me feel just like being surrounded by books. Yeah, sir? Have you done any writing other than poetry? I've written a little bit of, I've written about poetry, essays, reviews, a little bit, and I wrote a book of nonfiction. It's just a collection of nonfiction articles that I wrote for a weekly newspaper in San Diego, which was, I don't know if it's here, but that to me was fun to write that book because I got to meet people and do things that I never would have done as a poet. I hung around with cops a lot and wrote about cops a lot. I met fire eaters and I wrote about them. Hypnotists, I got hypnotized up and down and wrote about that. So that was fun. It got me to meet people and do things I would normally never do. But that's the only non-prose that I've published, and I probably won't do any more of that. Any questions? This was really, really, really nice. It's a privilege to be. This is a beautiful school, a good school. I've heard about it for years. I taught at Sarah Lawrence College for many years, and I taught at Warren Wilson College in their graduate program. And both of them are similar, smaller schools. You guys do a lot of the work on campus, right? As they did at Warren Wilson. You have small classes, and it's a fairly small, and obviously liberal arts college like Sarah Lawrence. So I felt very welcome here. I feel very comfortable, and thank you
very much.